My girlfriend once bragged, "If I can get him to marry me, I'll never have to work again." I realized I wasn't her partner. I was her retirement plan. Exposing her was just step one in the scheme my sister and I had carefully lined up. The real payoff came later. I remember the exact moment the penny dropped. It wasn't a dramatic revelation, no thunderclap or blinding flash of light. It was a slow, creeping dread that settled in my stomach and spread through my veins like ice water. We were at a dinner party, hosted by one of her colleagues, a stuffy affair filled with forced smiles and even stuffier conversation. My girlfriend, Tiffany, was holding court, a glass of champagne in her hand, her laughter tinkling like wind chimes. She was beautiful, undeniably so. Her blonde hair cascaded down her shoulders in perfect waves. Her blue eyes sparkled with mischief. And she had a way of tilting her head just so that made every man in the room want to rush to her rescue, including, for a long time, me. Someone had asked her about her job. She'd been between opportunities for the past 6 months, a phrase she used with practiced ease. I'd been footing the bill, of course, happy to do so. I was doing well, successful in my own right, and I loved spoiling her. "Oh, you know me," she'd giggled, fluttering her eyelashes. "I'm allergic to hard work. I'm much better at managing other people's resources." She paused, her gaze landing on me. "Besides," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "if I can get him to marry me, I'll never have to work again." The laughter that followed was jarring, like nails on a chalkboard. It wasn't the joke itself, although it was in remarkably poor taste. It was the way she said it, the casual, almost predatory gleam in her eyes. It was the realization that I wasn't her partner, her lover, her confidant. I was her meal ticket. I was her retirement plan. The drive home was silent. I stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of meaningless color. Tiffany chattered on about something, the party, the people, the dress she wanted to buy, but I didn't hear a word. My mind was replaying the scene over and over, dissecting it, analyzing it, trying to find a way to dismiss it as a joke, a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew the truth. The next few weeks were a blur of forced smiles and strained conversations. I couldn't look at Tiffany without seeing her as a calculating stranger. The love I thought I felt for her began to curdle, replaced by a bitter resentment. I found myself pulling away, spending more time at work, avoiding her calls. I confided in my sister, Sarah. We'd always been close, and I knew I could trust her. She listened patiently as I recounted the story, her expression hardening with each word. "She's a gold digger, Mark," she said bluntly. "A classic one. You need to get rid of her." "I know," I sighed. "But it's not that simple. I thought I was in love with her. I thought she was in love with me." Sarah snorted. "Love? Please. She's in love with your bank account." We spent hours talking, brainstorming, trying to figure out the best way to handle the situation. I couldn't just kick her out. That would be too easy. She'd move on to the next unsuspecting victim, and I couldn't live with that. We needed a plan, a way to expose her for who she really was, and ensure she couldn't do this to anyone else. That's when Sarah came up with the idea. It was risky, audacious, and potentially disastrous. But it was also the only way I could see to truly get justice. "We're going to play her game," Sarah said, a glint in her eyes. "We're going to make her think she's won, and then we're going to pull the rug out from under her." The plan was intricate, a carefully constructed web of lies and deception. It involved fake companies, offshore accounts, and a whole lot of acting. It was going to be expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. But I was willing to do anything to get rid of Tiffany and protect myself from further manipulation. Exposing her was just step one. The real payoff came later. The first step was to create the illusion of financial instability. I started losing money on bad investments, lamenting about the failing economy, and generally painting a picture of impending financial doom. I stopped buying Tiffany expensive gifts, started clipping coupons, and even suggested we eat in more often. Tiffany, initially, was unfazed. She dismissed my worries as temporary setbacks, assuring me that everything would be fine. But as the weeks went by and the financial crisis deepened, I could see the concern creeping into her eyes. She started asking pointed questions about my assets, my investments, and my overall net worth. I played the part of the desperate, floundering businessman to perfection, exaggerating my losses and downplaying my remaining assets. I even started talking about selling some of my properties, including the house we were living in. That's when Tiffany's true colors began to emerge. The sweet, charming girlfriend I thought I knew disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculating woman who was only interested in self-preservation. She became increasingly demanding, constantly pressuring me to transfer assets into her name, claiming it was for safekeeping. I resisted, of course, using every excuse I could think of, but I made sure to leave a trail of breadcrumbs, hinting that I was considering it, that I just needed to find the right legal loophole. Meanwhile, Sarah was working behind the scenes, setting up the fake companies and offshore accounts we needed to pull off the final act. She was a master of logistics, a detail-oriented planner who left no stone unturned. I couldn't have done it without her. Finally, after months of careful planning and meticulous execution, we were ready. The stage was set. The players were in place. It was time for the grand finale. I came home one evening, looking suitably distraught. "Tiffany," I said, my voice trembling, "I have some bad news. The bank is threatening to foreclose on the house. I've lost everything." Tiffany's eyes widened. "Everything?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Everything," I confirmed. Except for one thing. I managed to transfer some of my assets into a trust fund, offshore. It's not much, but it's enough to start over." Tiffany's face lit up. "A trust fund?" she exclaimed. "How much is in it?" "Enough," I said cryptically. "Enough to live comfortably, if we're careful." "We?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Of course we," I said, forcing a smile. "I can't do this without you, Tiffany. You're my rock, my support. I need you by my side." She hesitated for a moment, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. But the lure of the money was too strong to resist. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, I'll stay. But I want to see the trust fund documents. I want to know exactly what we're working with." "Of course," I said, relieved. "I'll show you everything. But first, there's something I need you to do for me." I explained that in order to access the trust fund, we needed to get married. It was a legal requirement, I said, a formality. But it was essential. Tiffany didn't hesitate. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it. Let's get married." We planned a small, intimate ceremony, attended only by our closest friends and family. Sarah, of course, was there, watching with a knowing smile. As I stood at the altar, waiting for Tiffany to walk down the aisle, I couldn't help but feel a surge of guilt. I was about to ruin this woman's life, to expose her in front of everyone she knew. But then I remembered her words, her casual admission that I was nothing more than her retirement plan, and the guilt faded away. As soon as the ceremony was over, I took Tiffany aside. "Okay," I said. "Now that we're married, it's time to access the trust fund. But there's one more thing you need to do. You need to sign a prenuptial agreement." Tiffany's face fell. "A prenuptial agreement?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "Why?" "It's just a formality," I said, trying to sound casual. "It's to protect both of us, in case anything happens." "But I thought you said we were in this together," she protested. "I thought you said you needed me." "I do need you," I said, "but this is just a precaution. It's standard procedure." I handed her the document. It was carefully worded, full of legal jargon that I knew she wouldn't understand. But the gist of it was clear. If we divorced, she would get nothing. Absolutely nothing. Tiffany stared at the document, her eyes darting back and forth, trying to decipher its meaning. Finally, she looked up at me, her face pale. "I'm not signing this," she said. "You have to," I said, my voice firm. "If you don't sign it, we can't access the trust fund. We'll be penniless." She hesitated for a long moment, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and desperation. Finally, she grabbed the pen and signed her name. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She had fallen right into my trap. The next day, we flew to the Cayman Islands to access the trust fund. I had arranged for a meeting with a local banker, a discreet and trustworthy man who was in on the plan. We sat in his office, the trust fund documents spread out on the table in front of us. Tiffany was practically giddy with excitement, her eyes gleaming with greed. "Okay," she said, "let's get this over with. How much is in the account?" The banker cleared his throat. "I'm afraid there's been a slight misunderstanding," he said. "There is no trust fund." Tiffany's face drained of color. "What do you mean, there's no trust fund?" she stammered. "I mean exactly what I said. the banker replied. This account is empty. There has never been any money in it. Tiffany turned to me, her eyes blazing with fury. You lied to me, she screamed. You tricked me. That's right, Tiffany, I said, my voice cold and hard. I did. I knew from the moment you said those words at the dinner party that you were only after my money. You didn't love me. You didn't care about me. You just wanted to use me. But the wedding, she cried. The prenuptial agreement. You made me sign it. That's right, I said. And now, thanks to that agreement, you're not entitled to a single penny. You're leaving here with nothing. Tiffany lunged at me, her nails outstretched, trying to scratch my face. But I was ready for her. I grabbed her wrists and held her at arm's length. Get out, I said, my voice low and menacing. Get out of my life. And don't ever try to contact me again. I released her, and she stumbled backward, her face contorted with rage and humiliation. She glared at me for a moment, then turned and stormed out of the office. I watched her go, feeling a mixture of relief and disgust. It was finally over. I had gotten rid of Tiffany, and I had done it in a way that would ensure she couldn't hurt anyone else. But the story doesn't end there. Exposing Tiffany was just step one. The real payoff came later. After the incident in the Cayman Islands, I returned home feeling emotionally drained but strangely liberated. The weight of Tiffany's deception had been lifted from my shoulders, and I was finally free to move on with my life. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been used, manipulated, and betrayed. And I wasn't just angry at Tiffany. I was angry at myself for being so naive, for allowing myself to be blinded by her beauty and charm. I decided that I needed to do something, to reclaim my sense of self-worth, to prove to myself that I wasn't a fool. That's when I started thinking about the real payoff, the ultimate revenge. Tiffany wasn't the only one who had been trying to manipulate me. Her entire family had been in on the scheme, subtly encouraging the relationship, showering me with compliments, and constantly hinting at the wonderful life Tiffany and I could have together. I realized that they saw me as their ticket to financial security, their way out of their own mundane lives. And I decided that I was going to take that away from them. I started by investigating Tiffany's family's finances. I hired a private investigator to dig into their bank accounts, their investments, and their overall financial situation. What I discovered was shocking. Tiffany's parents were deeply in debt, struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments and credit card bills. Her brother was unemployed, living off his parents and constantly asking them for money. And her sister was a struggling single mother, barely making ends meet. They were all desperate for money, and they had seen me as their savior. They had encouraged Tiffany to pursue me, to latch onto me, and to bleed me dry. I decided that I was going to turn the tables on them. I was going to use their desperation against them. I started by approaching Tiffany's brother, Michael. I knew he was the weakest link in the family, the most susceptible to temptation. I offered him a proposition he couldn't refuse. Michael, I said, I know you're struggling financially. I know you need money. I'm willing to help you out, but I need you to do something for me. Michael's eyes lit up. Anything, he said eagerly. What do you want me to do? I explained that I wanted him to provide me with information about Tiffany's family's finances, about their debts, their assets, and their overall financial situation. I told him that I was planning to invest in a new business venture, and I needed to know everything I could about their finances before I made a decision. Michael agreed without hesitation. He was so desperate for money that he was willing to betray his own family. Over the next few weeks, Michael provided me with a wealth of information. He told me about his parents' debts, his sister's struggles, and Tiffany's own secret bank accounts. I used this information to my advantage. I started buying up their debts, secretly acquiring their mortgages, their credit card bills, and their other financial obligations. I became their silent creditor, the one who held their financial fate in my hands. Once I had acquired enough leverage, I made my move. I called Tiffany's parents and informed them that I was now the owner of their mortgage, and I was demanding immediate payment in full. They were shocked and terrified. They had no idea how they were going to come up with the money. They begged me for mercy, pleading with me to give them more time. But I was relentless. I told them that I wasn't interested in their excuses. I wanted my money, and I wanted it now. Within a few weeks, Tiffany's parents were forced to sell their house and move into a small apartment. They were financially ruined, their lives shattered. Next, I turned my attention to Tiffany's sister, Lisa. I knew she was struggling to provide for her child, working long hours at a dead-end job. I offered her a lifeline, a chance to escape her financial misery. I told her that I was starting a new business and I needed someone to manage my accounts. I offered her a high-paying job with excellent benefits. Lisa was ecstatic. She couldn't believe her luck. She accepted my offer without hesitation. But there was a catch. I told her that in order to protect my business interests, she would have to sign a contract agreeing not to disclose any information about my finances or my business dealings. Lisa, desperate for the job, signed the contract without reading it carefully. She didn't realize that she was signing away her right to speak out against me, to expose my secrets. Once Lisa was under my control, I started using her to my advantage. I leaked false information to the media, spreading rumors about Tiffany and her family. I portrayed them as greedy, manipulative, and dishonest. The media lapped it up. They ran stories about Tiffany's failed marriage, her family's financial troubles, and their overall moral failings. Tiffany and her family were ostracized by their friends, their neighbors, and their community. They were pariahs, shunned and despised by everyone. And then, I turned my attention to Tiffany herself. I knew she was still struggling to make ends meet, bouncing from job to job, unable to hold down a steady position. I decided to offer her a chance at redemption, a way to rebuild her life. I contacted her and offered her a large sum of money in exchange for her silence. I told her that I was willing to pay her a significant amount of money if she agreed to leave the country, change her name, and never contact me or my family again. Tiffany hesitated for a moment. She was torn between her pride and her desperation. But the lure of the money was too strong to resist. She agreed to my terms. She took the money, left the country, and disappeared without a trace. With Tiffany and her family out of the picture, I was finally able to move on with my life. I had exacted my revenge, and I had done it in a way that was both satisfying and morally justifiable. I had taken away their financial security, their social standing, and their sense of self-worth. I had turned them into pariahs, outcasts, and exiles. But in the end, I realized that revenge wasn't as sweet as I had imagined. It didn't bring me the closure I had hoped for. It didn't fill the void in my heart. Instead, it left me feeling empty, bitter, and alone. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. I had sacrificed my own happiness in pursuit of revenge, and I had become the very thing I had hated, a cold, calculating, and manipulative person. I realized that the only way to truly heal was to forgive. To forgive Tiffany, to forgive her family, and to forgive myself. It wasn't easy. It took time, effort, and a lot of soul-searching. But eventually, I was able to let go of the anger and resentment that had been consuming me for so long. I started volunteering at a local charity, helping people who were struggling with financial difficulties. I found that by giving back to the community, I was able to find a sense of purpose and fulfillment. I also started dating again. This time, I was more careful, more discerning. I learned to look beyond the surface, to see people for who they really were. Eventually, I met someone who truly loved me for myself, someone who didn't care about my money or my social standing. We built a strong, loving relationship based on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. We got married and started a family. I finally found the happiness and fulfillment I had been searching for all along. And that, in the end, was the real payoff. Not the revenge, not the money, but the ability to forgive, to heal, and to find true love. Looking back, I realized that the experience with Tiffany taught me a valuable lesson. It taught me that money isn't everything, that true happiness comes from within, and that the most important thing in life is to love and be loved in return. It was a painful lesson, but it was one that I needed to learn, and I am grateful for it because it made me the person I am today. A better person, a stronger person, and a more compassionate person. And that, in the end, is all that really matters.